The story begins with Wakana waking up to a beautiful morning. As he yawns and heads downstairs, he is greeted with a shock on his face as he realizes his grandfather is awake before him. After exchanging greetings with his grandfather, Wakana says a quick prayer before joining his grandfather for breakfast. As they enjoy their delicious meal, Wakana speaks to his grandfather about his Hina dolls which he has spent sleepless nights working on. He dramatically spills out his food as his grandfather mentions his ability to make new friends at school. Wakana looks very anxious and shaken up as he responds to his grandfather. He quickly shuts down the idea as they both share a moment of laughter. Shortly after, he heads out as he makes his way to school. As Wakana walks down the street, he is ran into by a stranger from his school who instantly freaks out as he realizes it was a mistake of identity. Wakana awkwardly makes his way into his school building as he realizes he has no friends. Shortly after, while sitting in the classroom with other students, Wakana gets lost in his thoughts as he continues to obsess over his Hina dolls. With his head down, he overhears the other students talking about their favorite hobbies and interests. At this point, Wakana sits alone quietly as the feeling of loneliness and sadness sets in. He realizes that he has no hobbies and therefore is unable to relate with the other students. While caught up in his deep thoughts, one of the students suddenly trips over and lands against Wakana's desk as everybody watches nervously. Her friends quickly rush over to help her as they are visibly concerned of her safety. It is at this moment that Wakana realizes that the student who fell on his desk was his classmate, Marin Kitagawa. He becomes very anxious as Marin begins to talk to him. As they continue to talk, she suddenly spots something on his arm. Immediately Marin grabs Wakana's arm and questions him about it with great concern on her face. He quickly reacts by pulling his arm away and hides it away from her. Shortly after, Marin shares a laugh with her friends as they walk away. At this point, Wakana is left feeling ecstatic. He finds it hard to believe that he was just speaking to Marin Kitagawa, the girl who seems to have everyone's attention. Across the classroom, Marin and her friends are having a conversation about a guy who has been stalking Marin. Her friends questions why she showed no interest in the boy. She is quick to shut them down. She tells them she does not like people who make fun of others. At this point, Wakana's face lights up in shock. He is pleasantly surprised that Marin's world is the opposite of his. Shortly after, Wakana is seen feeling dejected because his classmates have left him to stack the chairs and clean up the classroom on his own. While having his moment, he begins to convince himself that being alone by his classmates to stack up the chairs is a blessing in disguise as he does not have to talk to anybody. Shortly after, Marin walks back into the classroom. Wakana is pleasantly surprised to see her. He is keen to find out why she has come back. She seems very disappointed that he has been left on his own to clean up the classroom. She is very animated because his friends have taken advantage of him. Days later, Wakana is seen working on his Hina dolls as he hurts his finger with scissors. His grandfather walks in looking very concerned as he sees him in pain. Not long after leaving, his grandfather returns with a plaster for Wakana to cover his wound. In the moment of all this, he reflects on his conversation with Marin as he struggles to get her of his mind. The following day, Wakana is back in school and working on his Hina dolls. He is working in the sewing practice room as his eyes lit up. He is so pleased with how easy the sewing machine is to use. While working on his dolls, someone unexpectedly barges into the sewing room. This causes Wakana to stumble to the floor as he attempts to stop his doll from falling. There is tension in the room as Wakana turns around and sees Marin standing over him. Her eyes instantly bulges as she spots the Hina dolls in Wakana's hands. She seems pleasantly surprised to find out that he sews Hina dolls. She is very excited to see the Hina doll. Wakana's face lights up in joy because he is pleased someone is impressed with his Hina dolls. The story continues with Wakana explaining to Marin that the Hina doll was made by his grandfather. He tells her that he only makes the clothes for the dolls. Marin seems very surprised and impressed to hear this, and she instantly begins to take off her school uniform. At this point, Wakana's chest begins to beat rapidly as panic sets in. He swiftly turns the other way as she continues to take off her clothes. Moments later, she tells him to look at her. He does as she says and finds out she is wearing a black dress which she has been working on. She shows him a picture of the dress inspiration on her phone. However, Wakana does not seem impressed as he approaches her to take a closer look at the dress. At this point, Wakana continues to criticize Marin's dress while she stands there in disappointment until he finally realizes she is unhappy and stops himself. He dramatically drops down to his knees as he apologizes to her about his comments about her dress. Marin confesses that she has been working on the dress in the sewing practice room after school because she does not own a sewing machine at home. She admits that the dress she has made is not the best as she falls on her knees and pleads for Wakana's help to design the perfect dress. While she pleads with him, Wakana begins to have flashbacks of the moments they have both shared together. Looking into her eyes passionately, he grants her wishes and promises to help her with the dress. At this point, Marin is visibly unable to contain her excitement as she jumps and screams around the room. Wakana and Marin are in the sewing practice room at school. He is caught up in the moment as Marin Kitagawa starts her storytelling. He has a strong look of confusion on his face as she begins to waffle on about her favorite game Shizuku Kuro-tan and her cosplay. At this point Wakana's mind is genuinely muddled up. He is unsure if he is daydreaming as he refuses to accept that Marin Kitagawa is telling him about an age-restricted game. Shortly after Wakana jumps up on his feet, he is unable to contain his excitement and starts to cry as he agrees to work with Marin on a cosplay for the Shizuku Kuro-tan from the game Slippery Girls 2. Marin hands Wakana a booklet that contains a guide on the basics of constructing a cosplay. He is very impressed by the information in the booklet and is very keen to begin the cosplay. At this point they both stare at each other's eyes as they say their goodbyes before Marin heads out. Wakana continues to have flashbacks of his time with Marin as he lays in bed with the booklet in his hands close to his chest. It is now the following morning. Wakana is woken up by the doorbell as he rushes to find out who is at the door. He is surprised to be greeted by Marin. He is feeling anxious as he shows her around his home and takes her up to his room at this moment. He remembers that the only person who has been in his room is his grandfather. Tensions are beginning to rise as she tells Wakana he needs to take her measurements as they prepare for their cosplay. He has a worried look on his face because he knows something that Marin doesn't. In order for him to take her measurements she has to take her clothes off. Unexpectedly Marin starts to take her clothes off, however Wakana quickly covers his face with a bag as he desperately avoids looking at her. She has a bathing suit underneath her outfit and tells Wakana to relax and stop worrying. At this point he slowly lowers the bag from his face and sees Marin in her bathing suit for the first time. He instantly freezes as he is overwhelmed by the sight of Kitagawa. He freaks out dramatically as she shakes him up to make sure he is okay. He anxiously starts taking her measurements. He takes one final deep breath with his hands shaking while holding the measuring tape. He slowly approaches her. At this point Wakana continues to freak out whilst attempting to take the measurements. Marin has asked him to measure her feet too as she makes herself comfortable on Wakana's bed. He panics and yells for Kitagawa to get off his bed because it may be filthy. After measuring her feet she proceeds to ask for her burst to be measured. Wakana is terrified but realizes he has to grant her wishes as he reluctantly wraps the tape around her burst to get the measurements. He releases a deep sigh of relief as he manages to take the burst measurements without any complications. Just when he thinks it is all over Kitagawa suddenly pleads with him to measure her inseam and burst point areas too. Wakana's facial expressions rapidly switches again as he goes into panic mode. While freaking out Kitagawa grabs the measuring tape from his hands and decides to take the measurements herself. He is very pleased and relieved because he no longer has to take her inseam and burst points measurements. While Marin is taking the final measurements Wakana takes a look at the measurements he has taken of her on his notepad. Marin suddenly turns around and he notices that her cheeks have turned bright red. She starts to freak out and convinces Wakana that she is okay. After this moment passes, she puts her clothes back on. She hands Wakana 2 booklets for Slippery Girls 2 references before she heads out. A short while after, Wakana decides to start working on the cosplay. His grandfather walks in on him as he passionately stares at his TV screen while taking notes for the outfit designs. Wakana's grandfather is surprised to see him so heavily invested in his work as he is taking notes on his notepad.